When I sat down to record this episode, I thought that I was going to talk about the fantasy of game development. The idea that one day my game will make millions and I won't have to work anymore and it'll be nice and relaxed and I'll just chill and make stuff that I want to make and nobody will bother me and it'll be so peaceful and wonderful. When I think in reality, if you have a massive success, people will bother you a lot more and it will be a lot less peaceful and you will have to take very active steps to make yourself a little wall or a protective barrier from all the people who are trying to get your attention. So there's that. I was going to do an episode thinking about that and contemplating whether or not this dream or fantasy that so many of us aim for is something that we've fully thought out and acknowledged and sort of take a little bit of the heat off of this desire for indie game dev success. But then I was thinking more about it and I was like, well, what's that's not really that useful because I've not been a successful indie game dev. I don't know. I'm not speaking from my own experiences here. So, what else could we talk about that gets at the same idea? And I think the deeper idea here is fantasizing about how something is going to be, planning for how something is going to be in this weird way that's not exactly planning, right? Setting these expectations and how much time we dedicate to that rather than just moving towards those expectations. I want to explore what is really planning, what really is goal setting, what is it that we're doing sometimes that feels like we're planning for something, it feels like we're setting a goal, but really we're just going, yeah, no, I'm planning for sure, but we're just procrastinating. I want to talk about that, and it's sort of navel gazing. There's sort of a mode that I get into, at least, where I'm like, no, I need to really, I really need to think about this thing. But at a certain point, it becomes, oh, and then it'll be so great, and it'll be this and that, and it becomes a fantasy. So that's what I want to get into today. This is Game, Develop, Repeat, and I'm your host, Chris. Welcome back. Now, we've talked about planning in the past, but I want to approach it differently today. I want to talk about the ways that I think I'm specifically having failures when planning. And in order to talk about that, as always, we're going to talk about some video games. When I was a kid, I would play tactical games a lot more. I would play games that require a fair bit of planning in order for you to complete the game. And I still have an interest in tactical games. I still have an interest in all of these, how do you put it, more thoughtful games, more cognitively heavy games, things that involve tactics, things that involve city building, crafting, all of this stuff. But I never really go deep on them. In contrast, I've seen people play these games and get really, really detailed with it. People will build a whole universe in a game like Minecraft or in a game like RimWorld or what have you. People will go deep into these games and build fantastic things. And the way that I play these games isn't quite, I think, the right way to play them for the goals that I have, if that makes any sense. And I know I'm over analyzing video games, but hey, welcome to the podcast. I think that the way that I play a game, like, let's just take Factorio, I get to a point where I go, oh, now I have to start really planning and optimizing and stuff. And then I just stop playing and I go, okay. I expect the game to organically just keep being efficient the whole way through. I expect the game to naturally evolve into more efficient versions. And then I get to a point in the game and I go, why is this all so messy? Oh, I have to fix all of this? Oh, I didn't plan ahead for it. So I played it wrong. So now we have a problem and I have to fix all this. And I should have made it so that I didn't have to fix it from the get-go, from the beginning. But now I do have to fix it. So I messed up. I'll restart the whole thing. Now, this is a strange tie-in, but in my day job, I've noticed that even people with like 20 years of experience in the stuff that we're doing make mistakes constantly with basic stuff. It's you can plan and you should plan, but even when they make a good plan, there's something that comes up later where it goes, "Oh, this could have been optimized even better. This could have been this could have been that," because there's so many moving parts. You don't learn where your inefficiencies are until you've run into the specific problem in the specific context that you were dealing with, and so on and so on and so on. And some people might remember it or have experience with that specific context before. That happens all the time too. But I think the mistake that I'm making in these games is that I run into a part where I go, "Oh, this is inefficient. Oh man, I wish I should just restart now that I know this, blah, 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 blah." When I think the real next step is to go, "Okay, how can I fix this? How can I optimize this? How can I make this cleaner? How can I make this better?" And then work from where I'm at. Make it better from where I'm at. And that seems so incredibly basic and straightforward and obvious, but a lot of the times there's these tricky little things with your mindset, or at least for me, where it's like, yeah, no, that's obvious. So now I don't have to pay attention to it. Oh, that's obvious. Of course I know that. Okay, so don't worry about it. Yeah, well, it's obvious, but I'm not doing it, right? I play a game like that and I get to a point and then I go, I don't want to deal with all this. I'm out, right? Now, there's something about that that's interesting. There's a third element here. There's this little hidden part that's sort of just a fantasy element. There's something about me here that says it should just work out. There is something in there that goes, I don't need to plan. It should just work out. I'm not really, I don't need to plan. It's fine. And I think part of the reason that happens is because I look at it and I go, I can't believe I'm still talking about Factorio. I look at it and I go, I don't think that planning is going to help me for some reason. Excuse me, going to help me for some reason. I have some kind of a sense that planning is just going to waste my time. Because oftentimes when I plan, that is what I do. I just waste my time. I look at the end game. I look at the goal that I'm trying to reach rather than actually planning. I go, oh, it'll look like this and that and the other, and it'll be so nice. It'll be so great. But I'm looking at this big picture. I don't look at the nitty gritty and go, ooh, if I put this here and I put this here, then that'll set me up for this, and then I can move this here and blah, 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 and so on. Instead, I look at the big picture and I kind of go, I don't know how to get there. Okay, well, I'm going to play something else. there's like a different scale of planning. And I've noticed this when I work on my game dev, which we'll get into in a second here. I've noticed this when I work into game dev, where if I'm looking at the smaller scale stuff, I can get into a flow. I can really enjoy myself. I can dig deep and have a good time. And then go back, zoom out very briefly, and then zoom back in. Zoom out so briefly and go, oh, here's the big picture. That's what I'm moving towards. Okay, adjust course a little bit, and we're in. I think I spend too much time zoomed out, both in games and in game development. Too much time looking at the big picture and just staring at it and going, how do I get here? How do I get here? How do I get here? I must plan a perfect route, the entire perfect route. From here to here, I must plan every single step of that route, and then I don't get hands-on. And you cannot, no matter how good you are at thinking things through, if you don't already have experience with it, you cannot plan a perfect route. I mean, you can write it down, you can start working on it on paper, you can start drafting it, yes, but just in your head, just floating around in your head, plan a perfect route from here to here for this whole thing, unless you've already experienced it, I don't think that's happening. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are people who can, but I cannot. Now, let's dig into how all of this relates to developing games. This issue that I run into of looking at the big picture too much can be a real stumbling block with game development. It can be a real issue. I look at everything and I go, okay, I want to do this. I pull out like tons of sheets of paper and start writing out everything, and then I look at it and I get overwhelmed and so on and so on. But then The opposite end of it is that I just dive directly in and know absolutely nothing about what I'm doing, and then run into a different problem, which is that I'm heading in completely the wrong direction. So, where is this middle ground? Well, planning can be scary because you're making something somewhat concrete. And I think that's one of the big obstacles here. But I do think the middle ground is to make something extremely concrete, but of a small portion of your project. This has worked for me in the past. I just set a very clear direction and expectation, and then I start working towards it. And this is, of course, a skill, right? Like everything. You try it, you mess it up, you figure out a way that works better for you. It's kind of a meta skill. You get better and better at the act of planning, but it's something you have to notice, I think, like most things, and go, oh, wait, no, I'm getting better at this big picture thing that I wasn't even trying to get better at initially. So the planning issue, the planning issue for me, the things I've run into the most are looking too much at the really big picture or not looking at the big picture at all. And when I write down these specific details, when I write down exactly what I'm aiming for, I'm talking 20 levels as a starting point. I'm making a platform. I go, okay, I want 20 levels and I want let's say 4 different themes, 5 levels per theme. All right. So there's a mechanic that gets introduced every 5 levels, or there's a visual theme, or there's a difficulty shift, or there's something that makes these levels distinct. And then I can say, okay, for each set of 5 levels, I want to start easier and get more difficult. And the last 5 levels are going to be bigger than the first 5 levels. This is already enough to dive in. This is already significant. Now, then you dive in a little deeper and say, okay, what are these levels going to be about? What are these ones going to be about? And then so on and so on. Now you have enough to start working, in my opinion. And then from there, you can zoom out again. You make those levels, you started learning something. Maybe you finish making 5. Maybe you make 1 of each, and then you zoom back out and you go, how are these? Are these fitting together? Is this good? Do I need to make any adjustments? Oh, I do. Okay, make that adjustment before I get too deep. Or, no, I'm feeling pretty good about this. Okay, dive back in. Make some more. Finish those 20 levels. Zoom out, look at the big picture of the game again, and say, okay, I've made these levels. I have a draft. How is the gameplay looking? How is this connecting to the story that I'm going to do? Is there going to be any story here? Is this going to be here? Where am I connecting this? Are there breakpoints between the levels where there's some kind of a dialogue thing? Figure out that next part, that next important bit, or go, how does it feel with just these levels? Do I need to do a little bit of editing? Of course, being careful not to do too much editing and get caught up in it, make a perfect version of some level that you're not going to end up using in the long run because you don't have the big picture of the game figured out at all. My point is, the zooming in is what's really important to me. The zooming in is what I really miss out on. There's a lot of times when I just stay zoomed out. And the only way you can do the zooming in, and this is the part that I really want to emphasize, this is almost the point of the entire episode. The only way that you do the zooming in is if you do the work of doing the actual development. You can theorize, you can theory craft, you can get in there, you can contemplate, you can draw it out a little bit. That to me is actual development work. But you don't know what you're making until you start making it. I have seen this so much at work, and I know this is going to be a weird analogy, but I really need you to trust me on this. This is something that you don't really understand fully until you've experienced it. I think we've probably all had some level of experience with this, but let me tell you this with a story about work. We were using zip ties on a building. Right, we're electricians and we're doing cable management, right? We're using zip ties, and I quickly learned that I was not using zip ties correctly. I went into it and I went, okay, I'm just going to zip tie like this and it'll be great. And then I went down, and then one of the other electricians looked at my cable management that I did, and they went, that looks terrible. And I went, what do you mean? And then I went and I looked at it and I was like, oh, that is terrible. Oh my God. So I was in there doing the nitty gritty, and then I zoomed out, looked at it from the ground, saw all the zip ties with the cables and everything. And I went, oh, the spacing on these cables is bad. And he's like, yeah, so where you zip tied, you did this, this, and this. So because of the specific placement of the zip ties, it allows these cables to still have a gap in them. So you need to place them this way so that there's less gap between the cables and everything is nice and tight and neat. And this is important because he has a conception of the bigger picture, like down the line. And it's like, yeah, all these little curves in these cables are actually a problem down the line. This is very important that we get these little details right, and it looks bad. So then we go back and I go, oh, okay, I need to zip tie like this. This is the kind of tiny little detail that you only notice when you're actually doing it. But when you're just theory crafting and you've never done it before, you go, oh, and then I'll just throw some zip ties here. But when it comes to a video game, just throw some zip ties here creates a terrible user experience. I'll just do it this way is not great. Oh, I'll just do this thing real quick. Yeah, no, you're not going to have a good time. You're going to have a bad time. You're going to make something that doesn't have a good aesthetic. You're going to make something that doesn't flow smoothly because you didn't try the thing, zoom out, look at it, learn lessons, zoom back in, fix it. You can have a perfect plan. You can have this whole thing laid out from far away. You can say that you've taken care of every little detail, but then you get in there and you go, oh, I forgot to put a lock washer on this in the plan. So now I need lock washers everywhere. Otherwise, everything is just going to break. Everything is not going to be right. Everything's going to be an issue. Things aren't going to be secure. Nothing's going to be level. And then when nothing is level, then this is wrong down the line. And then this other thing and this other thing and this other thing. And it's not about getting it perfect. It's about making sure that it's as good as it can be. And this is the most valuable game dev lesson that I've taken from just my day job, which I think is a valuable trick, by the way. Taking game dev lessons from your day-to-day life is huge. We've got to have this skill transfer. We've got to take skills from other parts of our life and apply them to our art, because our art is a reflection of us and our experiences. But the biggest thing that I've taken from my day job is just get in there and do the work. You can have 20 years of experience and you can look at something for hours at a time. And then when you get in there and do the work, it's going to change. There's going to be something different. So make a plan. Make a plan that's pretty complete, but don't dwell on making the plan perfect, because something's going to go wrong. Make a plan that is very strong and executable, and you can go in and you can go, okay, here we go, and still flexible if possible. Make sure that you leave some room to move things around and correct for things. Yes, you're going to get locked in. Yes, there's going to be stuff that's not going to be perfect that you're just going to have to deal with. Something's going to be a little bit ugly. Something's going to be a little bit less than ideal. Something is going to be a little bit finicky, but you are going to do way better than you would have if you either never started executing and just spent all of your time planning, or just didn't plan and just threw some stuff up there and made it look horrific. It is well worth the time to plan, but I think that we assume that planning takes way longer than it should. I think that a plan should be tight. A plan should be clear, and a plan should be somewhat flexible and small. And the only way to do this, the only way to learn all of this, is to do it, to try it out, to test it out, to see what works for you, because we all have a different mind, and maybe you can handle a larger scale plan and execute it much more cleanly than I can. But for me, if I'm standing around planning for 2-3 hours on something, then I start to get a little bit disoriented. I start to get a little bit like, oh God, how am I ever going to do all that? And I get demotivated. But if I say that, but there's a difference between, this is very hard to convey verbally. There's a difference between planning something for several hours in a very productive way and wallowing in one aspect of the plan or ruminating on one aspect of the plan. If I am sitting down with a notebook and drawing out my UI and then crossing it out and drawing it out again and crossing it out and doing new iterations of it, that's great. there's a phase that is iterative planning. There's a phase that is like you write the plan and you go, no, 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 that doesn't work. And then you go again and you go, no, that doesn't work either. And it's very clear and obvious that that is not going to work and that is going to be a problem and so on. You could be doing that for days. You could be going through that kind of planning for a long time and still have it be productive. But the moment that you slip into the form of planning that is this right? Or is it like when you start getting very ambiguous, when you start going, which one of these do we want to do? Oh, I don't know. Do we want to try this way or do we want to try this way? Maybe this will work. Maybe this will work. I don't know. They kind of seem, I guess we'll do it this way. Yeah, okay. I don't know. But what about that? Like when you just start debating back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, it's time to move on. It's time to try it because you'll find out real quick and then you'll probably try it and you'll go, oh, the other way would have been better because blah, blah, blah. I mean, if it doesn't take long, try the other way. See if the other way is better. And then you've learned. But when you get to that point where you're just bouncing back and forth, you don't have enough information. You have to gather more information. So you either need to ask someone who knows or you need to try it. And too often I just sit in that space of wallowing and going back and forth and going, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And that doesn't work. You're going to spend so much time, and I've seen this in person. I've seen people do this. You spend so much time contemplating which option is better that you could have done both options. You could have tested both options and determined which one was better in the time that it took you to go, fine, I guess I'll do this one. And then you're so committed to it because you spent so much time deciding. And you're like, no, this has to be the right plan. You've convinced yourself that that's the way to go. No, man, just try both options. And then you're good. You know, sometimes this works, sometimes this doesn't. It depends on the scale, blah, 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 blah. But I think it's a very easy trap to fall into. I've got a pretty straightforward question for you today, which is what element of the planning process gets in your way the most? Where do you get into trouble? Is it the fantasizing about the game? Is it looking at the big picture and going, oh, it's going to be so incredible, and then you get yourself to a point where you end up just procrastinating on it because it's so intimidating? Is it the tiny detail that you spend 3 weeks on because, oh, it's going to change everything, and then you look, you zoom out and you go, oh, I've only worked on this tiny detail and I don't even know what my game is or if this fits into it? Or is it the idea where you go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth over and over and over and over when you could just test it and determine which one you like more? Do you spend more time contemplating than you do actually producing? And I do think planning can count as producing if you're actually drafting and drafting again and drafting again. So what is it in planning that gets in your way? Maybe it's no planning at all. For me, it's probably a little bit of all of the things that I just mentioned. You may have your own unique thing that you run into, but planning, figuring it out instead of just staring at my own belly button and going, maybe if I do this thing, just contemplating the nature of my existence, full-on navel-gazing game development where I'm just, oh, well, it could be this way or it could be that way or maybe it's this way or maybe it's that way. Oh, I'll never know. I got to keep thinking about this before I start making the game because I've got to get it perfect and it has to really speak to the essence of my existence. Anything to avoid sitting down and dealing with your code, right? Sometimes you just don't want to deal with your code, which is also fine. You can just step away and go, why don't I want to deal with my code? Oh, maybe I just need some fresh air. That can be the case too. That's everything that I have for you this week. Thank you for joining me. It's always nice knowing that people are out there listening to my crazy ramblings about game development. I appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next one. Until then, get out there, make some stuff, and have fun with it. Bye-bye.